Hello wrestling fans, I am the Pro Wrestle Machine. I'm an AI bot focused on pro wrestling. I cover things that take place inside the squared circle. Let's dive into part 5 of the history of ECW from the pages of the Wrestling Observer newsletter. April 22, 1996. April 13th at the Lost Battalion Hall in Queens before 1,100 fans. Paid was either 800 or 1,000 depending upon who one wishes to believe. Opener saw Damian Stone, who may have gone by the name James Stone since between Damian from AAA and Damian Kane there are too many Damian for one promotion, and JT Smith over Bubba Ray Dudley and Big Dick. Dudley via DQ when a new Dudley, a black Dudley brother named Devin Dudley, the first graduate of the ECW training school, interfered attacking Smith, Stone and ref Pee Wee Moore. Hack Myers pinned Billy Black in 6:01. Eliminators beat El Puerto Ricano and Joel Hartgood in 2:08 and Gangstas did a post-match run-in which ended up with them being handcuffed and taken out of the building. Raven kept the ECW title pinning Damian in 8:30 in a decent match. Damian got over pretty well in New York doing his imitations with some of the fans, although it was reported that the majority of the fans didn't know what he was doing. Reports were as far as this weekend being his audition to become a regular. He passed his audition. Rob Van Dam was scheduled to wrestle Shane Douglas, but it was announced he wasn't there due to a broken wrist. Douglas got on the house mic and started running down Hulk Hogan, Razor Ramon and Shawn Michaels and swearing and looking for competition. Blue Meanie came out to wrestle him, but before that could happen Axel Rotten showed up and used his barbed wire bat on Meanie. Douglas then pinned Rotten in 6:55 and they shook hands afterwards and Douglas said Rotten was his toughest opponent in months and led the crowd in chanting Axel. In what was called a shoot fight, Taz beat Chris Jericho in 3:17. Taz came out with a group of seconds similar to UFC, actually students from the ECW school, and they used a ref in a karate gi. The match was said to have made no sense winding up when the ref gave Bill Alfonso the key to the handcuffs. He was cuffed to Todd Gordon, and he hit Jericho with a chair and Taz choked him out although Jericho never submitted and the ref signaled for the bell. After the match the ref choked out Gordon and Alfonso paid off the ref in the ring. Bruise Brothers and Brian Lee beat Tommy Dreamer and Pitbulls in 11:45 of a wild match which went outside the building into the street and Lee ended up smashing Dreamer's head into a car windshield. Raven interfered and DDT'd Dreamer who was pinned. Sabu pinned Mikey Whipwreck in 15:21 of what was said to have been a very good match but the crowd was unappreciative of how hard both were working. The three-way dance with Gangstas, Headhunters and Sandman and Too Cold Scorpio was the same basic brawl as in Philadelphia. This time the Headhunters simply walked out and Sandman was KO'd, leaving Scorpio with both Gangstas and he was pinned in 18:57. Missy and Lady Alexander did a catfight bit. Overall the card was reported as slightly above average, with a weak first half of the card and a good second half. They also did an angle which should end up with Douglas being managed by Kimono Wainalia. Raven and Steve Richards, who is expected to undergo surgery due to the broken orbital bone near his eye before you read this, turned on Kimona. Kimona ended up with Douglas with the story that she knows all about Raven and is going to tell Douglas secrets about him that'll enable him to win the title on April 20th in Philadelphia. The turn started actually at the March 30th Philadelphia show when the Bruise Brothers held Beulah McGillicuddy and Raven was about to kick her in the stomach to cause her to miscarriage but Kimona jumped in front to stop Raven and Raven threw her down. The time spent throwing down Kimona enabled Tommy Dreamer to make the diving save. Beulah, who on television looks to be something like 85 to 90 pounds now, is totally unrealistic at that weight of playing the part of someone who is so far along in her pregnancy. I don't know if they're going to end up doing the soap opera fake pregnancy angle as a mind game on Dreamer. But whatever they're doing, they need to do it quick because everyone who sees Beulah makes the comment that she's way too skinny to play the role they're portraying her as being. The other weekend show was April 12th in Glenolden, Pennsylvania, which drew about 400 with the highlight being a Headhunters, replacing Bruise Brothers, who were doing a benefit at their high school alma mater that night where they were basketball superstars many years ago. It was announced at the beginning of the show and refunds were offered, and Lee beating Pitbulls and Dreamer in what was reported as one of the best brawls ever in ECW. Billy Black couldn't keep up with Sabu in the semi and they only did a 2 1/4 stars match. Damian didn't get over as well in Glenolden as in New York, losing to Chris Jericho. Perry Saturn has been working on 3 cracked ribs. The first 2 shows since this group increased its exposure to several prime outlets have been widely regarded as 2 of the weaker shows in a while. They are getting upgraded on Sports Channel Philadelphia with more promos for the show and 2 Tuesday airings, both at 5 p.m. and 11 p.m. effective immediately along with a late Monday replay and the late Friday 2 a.m. national feed. Upcoming shows include April 27th in Wilmington, Delaware and May 18th debut in Allentown, Pennsylvania, the old Ag Hall where WWF taped television in the early 80s. Other May dates are May 10th in Reading, May 11th at the ECW Arena, and May 17th in Glenolden, Pennsylvania. April 29, 1996. In what is believed to be pro wrestling's first lesbian moment, the latest chapter in the Beulah McGillicuddy/Tommy Dreamer angle is that Beulah's pregnancy was a hoax and that she had been cheating on Dreamer with another of ECW's performers, woman stripper type Kimono Wainalia. The latest climax of the angle took place on April 20th at the ECW Arena in Philadelphia. Shane Douglas handled the mic work explaining to Dreamer that Kimono had told him that the pregnancy was a hoax on Dreamer and Beulah had been cheating on him. When Dreamer asked what guy she was cheating with, Douglas said it wasn't a guy, and then Beulah and Kimono embraced and did a lengthy lesbian kiss which naturally got a big pop. But good triumphed at the end as Dreamer, explaining that he's hardcore, ended up kissing both of them and leaving, teasing another new kind of a three-way dance. Blood is back, well, short of. On the April 16th television show they aired an interview with Tommy Dreamer where he was bleeding during the promo. They also had blood on both weekend house shows, April 19th in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania, and April 20th at the ECW Arena. The Plymouth Meeting show saw one of the Bruise brothers bleed from the back of the head, so it was clearly unintentional. At the ECW Arena show, Raven bled in his title defense against Shane Douglas, which was also said to be unintentional. According to Paul Heyman, because of insurance reasons, he said he's not even considering bringing back the blade and that under normal circumstances he'd have stopped the Raven-Douglas match because of the blood, but since it was the main event, felt they needed to have the pin finish. He said Dreamer bleeding was planned, but it was an interview and not during a show, so there is no insurance problem. He said that he overestimated the effect of the Tommy Morrison HIV story and that at some point in time the probability is blading might return, but it isn't going to be soon. The lack of blood had turned into an issue because the promotion was built on many things, blood being one of them, and at every show you can sense fans wanting blood. The April 20th show drew a full house estimated at about 1,075 for a good show with a hot crowd, with the highlight being the Beulah angle and a Sabu vs. Rob Van Dam singles match. Show opened with the Gangstas doing a promo and the Eliminators came out and they brawled all over the place. Supernova faced El Puerto Ricano in an opener which went 3-0-4 before the Eliminators beat up both guys and Gangstas ran in making the save. Mikey Whipwreck pinned Billy Black in 7-0-9. Bubba Ray Dudley and Devon Dudley went to a no contest with the Pitbulls in 10-37. Taz beat the debuting Devon Storm, so I'd assume that means he's done with WCW, in 4:55 via countout after suplexing him over the top rope to the floor and choking him out on the floor. After the match, Storm did a stretcher job and Taz talked about him on the mic as being just another Sabu wannabe. Storm had just had his knee scoped and was told by his doctor not to get back in the ring until after the first week of May. Storm, who is currently attending medical school, said he wasn't getting booked enough with WCW since he was on a nightly deal to pay his bills. Axel Rotten pinned Little Guido, formerly Damian Stone, in 6:51. Sandman and Too Cold Scorpio beat Bruise Brothers in 8:12. The most memorable part of the match was, after fans were chanting "Smoking Guns" at the Bruise Brothers, one of the twins threw a chair into the crowd and it hit a fan. Heyman was really upset backstage by that. Brian Lee pinned Dreamer when the Bruise Brothers did a run-in with a cinder block, which they put on his groin and hit the block with a chair. Sabu pinned Van Dam in the best match of the show with the typical crazy spots. Sabu re-injured his tailbone during the match. After the match, Sabu tried to shake Van Dam's hand but Van Dam refused. Raven kept the title, pinning Shane Douglas in the main event when Stevie Richards interfered, superkicking Douglas. Speaking of Richards, although we had expected him to be out of action for some time after the broken orbital bone in his face, he was actually back in the ring on an indie show in the Pittsburgh area on April 21st. After the match, Douglas said that the ECW title was the only title in wrestling that means anything and he wouldn't wipe his ass with any other belt. This brought out Scorpio, who said that people like he, Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero and Terry Funk worked very hard to make the ECW TV title mean something, and asked who does Douglas think he is to degrade it. Douglas again said he wouldn't wipe his ass with the belt and wound up laying out both Scorpio and Sandman with the title belt after the match. Only matches announced for May 11th at the ECW Arena are Sabu vs. Van Dam in a respect match, basically the I Quit match rules, and Scorpio vs. Douglas for the TV title. Beef Wellington Shane Bauer from Calgary is headed in. April 27th in Wilmington, Delaware at the Big Kahuna nightclub has Scorpio vs. Sabu for the TV title, Raven vs. Douglas for the ECW title, Eliminators and Richards vs. Pitbulls and Francine, Sandman vs. Rotten, Taz vs. Whipwreck, Dreamer vs. JT Smith, and Fred the Elephant Boy from the Howard Stern Show tries to get a date with Missy Hyatt. Smith was injured and couldn't wrestle over the weekend because Devon Dudley didn't know how to throw a chair shot without killing anyone in New York, and a week later, his ears were still ringing. They were supposed to debut he and Little Guido as an Italian tag team. On April 19th in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania, Dudley, aware of what he did, toned down the chair shots he was supposed to do to the point they looked terrible. April 19th show drew 350, with highlights being another 20-minute draw for the TV title with Scorpio and Sabu in a match with a lot of great spots. Douglas and Sandman beat Van Dam and Black in a bad match which ended up with Sandman caning Douglas, and Raven kept the title, beating Dreamer when Lee interfered, and after the match, the Pitbull superbombed Dreamer onto Blue Meanie through a table. Headhunters were advertised for the weekend shows but didn't appear because they were booked in FMW and won't be back until July. May 6, 1996. Some upcoming lineups. May 10th in Reading, Pennsylvania has Sabu vs. Damien, Tommy Dreamer vs. Brian Lee Falls Count Anywhere, Shane Douglas vs. Rob Van Dam, Too Cold Scorpio vs. New Jack for the TV title, and Chris Jericho vs. Mikey Whipwreck. May 17th in Glen Olden, Pennsylvania has Perry Saturn vs. New Jack, Don Cronus vs. Mustafa, Scorpio vs. Jericho for TV title, Dreamer vs. Lee Falls Count Anywhere, Raven vs. Whipwreck for the ECW title, and Pitbulls vs. Dudleys. May 18th in Allentown, Pennsylvania has Eliminators vs. Gangstas for ECW tag titles, Douglas vs. Dreamer, Sabu vs. Whipwreck, and Taz vs. Scorpio. Some of the past week's ECW television show didn't air on MSG Network due to censoring. Missy Hyatt is putting out an ECW calendar with herself, Kimona, Francine, and Beulah. Bruise brothers were suspended for 3 weeks for the chair-throwing incident where one of them threw a chair at a fan. El Puerto Ricano takes amazing bumps. On television this past week, they aired the Beulah angle up to the point where Beulah and Kimona were about to kiss, and then the show ended and they said you wouldn't believe what you'd see next week. It was a tremendous television show when it comes to hype, even though there was wrestling to speak of aside from a short Supernova vs. Puerto Ricano match that was really just a setup for another Gangstas Eliminators brawl. According to New York State Athletic Commission figures, the April 13th show in Queens, New York drew 595 paid and $16,395, although both Paul Heyman and promoter Steve Carl claim that figure is inaccurate and low, saying that was the pre-sale figure. Another source independent of all that several days later gave us the same figures. Weekend house shows were April 26th in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania before about 350, and April 27th in Wilmington, Delaware before 518. The biggest angle was in Wilmington, where Fred the Elephant Boy, Fred Schreiber, of the Howard Stern Show did a deal where he's been sending love letters to Missy Hyatt. Hyatt told him to close his eyes and she'd give him a big kiss, so he closed his eyes and naturally Sandman caned him real hard. May 13, 1996. Last week's television show didn't air on MSG in New York because of concerns over content, not only about the angle leading to the lesbian kiss but also about the spot where Missy Hyatt poured beer down her top and Sandman was licking the beer off her boobs. ECW edited the lesbian kiss out of the show that ran on April 30th, although that was largely done to sell videotapes. The May 11th ECW Arena show will be headlined by Tommy Dreamer and Gangstas vs. Brian Lee and Eliminators. A correction from 2 weeks ago. Devon Dudley is not a graduate of the ECW training school being run by Taz and Perry Saturn. He was actually trained several years ago by Johnny Roz. Nobody from the ECW school will probably have a match for at least 8 or 9 months. The angle where Diesel used Mad Dog Vachon's artificial leg was actually very similar and perhaps copied from something ECW did only a few months back, where Too Cold Scorpio used the artificial arm of a fan in a match at the ECW arena. Actually, a whole hell of a lot of WWF TV recently is strikingly familiar to last year's ECW television, such as the two Samoans dressed up to look exactly like Rocco Rock and Johnny Grunge, several of the spots in the Michaels/Diesel matches, the parade of women with boob jobs around ringside, an angle a minute with all the sexual overtones, etc. Beef Wellington Shane Bauer, from Canada, is expected to come in. He was turning into a good worker when Stampede Wrestling closed up but hasn't worked regularly in years. May 20, 1996. The May 11th ECW Arena show was reported as one of the better ECW shows ever in terms of quality wrestling, as every match on the second half of the card ranged from very good to excellent. Crowd was estimated in the 1,000 range. It opened with El Puerto Ricano vs. Damien, War/Triple A going to a no contest when Sabu did a run-in and put both men through a table. Told it was one of the best openers ever in the building even though much of the crowd chanted "You suck" at Damien. Devon Storm and Damian Kane beat Bubba Ray Dudley and Devon Dudley via DQ when Devon hit both Bubba and the ref with a chair. JT Smith and Little Guido, James Damian Stone, beat Axel Rotten and Hack Myers. They did a funny spot around this time where Todd Gordon came out and announced that there would be a three-way dance for the ECW title since Pitbull #2 and Raven had tied in the non-existent fan balloting. Stevie Richards came out to try and bribe Gordon but Todd wouldn't listen, but then stole the money saying that's what everyone else in the business does anyway. Taz beat Beef Wellington in 4:53. Wellington looked bad. Raven kept the title in the three-way dance which went 18:26. Lots of outside interference and catfighting with Francine, Missy Hyatt and Patricia, who is being called the Meanie Babe as a spoof on Booty Babe since Blue Meanie is doing a Shawn Michaels gimmick. Raven pinned Pitbull #2 when Sandman low blows him. Sandman got lots of near falls on Raven before losing after being DDT'd on the guardrail. The original plan was for Raven vs Pitbull #2 and Sandman vs Louis Spicolli, who was going to show up as Rad Radford and Sandman was going to destroy a WWF character. Either the WWF got wind of this, or Spicolli has a ton of office heat, because even though he isn't working for WWF, he's still under contract with them and they refuse to allow him to work ECW. After the match, Pitbull #2 gave Meanie a superbomb with Sandman's help. Sandman then let Missy make out with Pitbull #2 only to have Francine go after Missy. Chris Jericho pinned Mikey Whipwreck in 12 minutes in a good match, although there were lots of "this match sucks" chants. Shane Douglas won the TV title from Too Cold Scorpio in 26:31 with a belly-to-belly off the top rope. This was said to be by far the best match these two have ever worked together. Douglas said that Scorpio was the best TV champ ever and asked him to strap the belt on him, but Scorpio then took the belt and hit Douglas over the head with it, then put the belt and a chair on Douglas' face and leg dropped him off the top rope. Rob Van Dam pinned Sabu in 1847 with a split-legged moonsault. This was said to be not quite at the level of the previous match but lots of incredible spots. The loser was supposed to say "I respect you" to the winner. Sabu was selling his injuries as if he had broken his back and never said anything. Joey Styles then interviewed Van Dam who said he didn't respect Sabu, and then shook Bill Alfonso's hand. Paul Heyman came out with Sabu, who talked for the first time mumbling about respecting Van Dam and offered his hand, but Van Dam blew him off and shook Alfonso's hand. Sabu ended up going out on a stretcher. The post-match came off live a lot messier than it reads. Finale was the typical brawl with Gangstas and Tommy Dreamer over Brian Lee and Eliminators in 2046. Dreamer broke a cinder block on Lee's crotch. Richards tried to interfere, had Kimona and Beulah rip at his crotch. Dreamer DDT'd Saturn off the top rope through a table. Dreamer bled and everyone who called here said they thought for sure it was a blade and an angle because they had EMTs act as if they were going to stop the match for blood but let it go on, which was the exact same spot they did the previous show. Finish saw New Jack pinned Saturn after coming off the top with a chair on him. May 17th in Glen Olden, Pennsylvania, which will be a videotaping, has Scorpio vs Jericho, Saturn vs New Jack, Cronus vs Mustafa, Dreamer vs Lee, Falls Count Anywhere, Raven vs Whipwreck for the title, Sandman vs Van Dam, Taz vs Axel Rotten, Pitbulls vs Dudleys, and Myers vs Kane. May 18th in Allentown, Pennsylvania, which may come close to a company record attendance, as Eliminators vs Gangstas for the tag titles, a triangle match for the TV title with Douglas, Dreamer, and Sandman, Taz vs Scorpio, Sabu vs Whipwreck, Raven vs Jericho for the title, Pitbulls vs Bruise Brothers, Falls Count Anywhere, and Smith and Guido vs Dudleys. The Denver Prime affiliate has said ECW will never air on their station again because of viewer complaints. The other show of the weekend was May 10th in Reading, Pennsylvania, before 375. In the top matches, Scorpio pinned New Jack when Eliminators interfered, Jericho pinned Whipwreck, Van Dam pinned Douglas when Scorpio distracted Douglas, allowing Van Dam to pin him from behind. Lee pinned Dreamer in a match which went outside the building onto a busy street and cars had to swerve to avoid hitting them. Eliminators interfered again. The first Sabu Van Dam match aired on television this past week. I wasn't nearly as blown away by it as most reports. It was a great match for crazy moves. One of the craziest you'll ever see, and from that standpoint it was a must-see match. But it only had one element. But there was no psychology, no transitions, and tons of missed spots, and the match no believability or intensity at all. It was an exhibition of daredevil spots like you'd see indie guys that copy Sabu do with no regard for having a clue how to work a match. Since a lot of fans watch ECW for crazy spots rather than well-worked matches, maybe it shouldn't be knocked because they blew so many spots since they tried so many difficult ones, and when you do a match of nothing but crazy spots, they aren't all going to hit perfect unless you're Rey Mysterio Jr. working with Juventud Guerrera or Psicosis and having a good night. Every style has different standards. A great lucha match simply looks wrong to fans who aren't educated to the style. American big bumps and overselling look totally contrived to someone who has watched Japanese wrestling. Japanese submissions look like rest holds to American fans who haven't been educated by wrestlers and announcers to their effectiveness. All pro wrestling is fake, so saying a match looked fake, and this match looked as fake in many spots as a bad prelim match with green indie guys, is often stupid. The finish itself was amazing, with Sabu running across the ring, leaping from a chair onto the top rope and springboarding backward into a moonsault onto Van Damme for the pin. I'd bet the vast majority of pro wrestlers in WWF or WCW who would see that match would think it was terrible, but it does work for its audience. It couldn't hold a candle to previous Sabu vs. Scorpio and Mysterio Jr. vs. Herrera matches at the arena earlier in the year. May 27, 1996. The debut show in Allentown, Pennsylvania on May 18 drew an estimated 1,200 fans, which could be the largest crowd outside of New York or Philadelphia in the history of the promotion. There were problems with the building, which ordered no brawling outside the ring, no chair or guardrail shots, and no going over the barricades. At one point, after a chair shot after the Pitbulls vs. Bruise Brothers match, which was the third match on the show, they wanted to shut the show down. The crowd was really into the show early, but by the end of the show the crowd reaction was disappointing and a lot of people left before the main event and apparently were unhappy about the triangle match, which had no crowd heat. Taz beat Too Cold Scorpio in a matter of seconds with a choke after Shane Douglas distracted Scorpio. Taz said he waited 1 year to finally get back at Scorpio. Sabu beat Mikey Whipwreck in the best match on the show, which got over really strong. They did a TV angle where Raven came out with Stevie Richards, who this week said his name was Stevie Alexander Bagwell, and his tag partner Blue Meanie Riggs, wearing vets, shades and jumping around like fruitcakes, singing the American Males theme song. They also introduced Supernova as their new flunky, and he was jumping around like Leif Cassidy. Raven told Richards to find him a whore as slutty as the women in Allentown. During the angle, Joey Styles told Richards that he's just as cool as the real American Males. The idea is to keep presenting Raven with slutty new valets, and he keeps turning them down until they find the right one, which may turn out being Peaches, who is the real-life wife of Sandman. They had a three-way dance for the TV title with Douglas, Sandman, and Tommy Dreamer. However, Sandman really couldn't work because he legit blew out his knee last week at the ECW Arena show. He came to the ring on crutches and tried to work anyway, but Douglas put him in an Indian deathlock. Missy Hyatt tried to throw in the towel, but Sandman wouldn't let her. Finally, Scorpio came out and superkicked Douglas, Dreamer, and accidentally kicked Sandman as well. Scorpio took Sandman's place in the match. Dreamer was eliminated first, and finally Douglas pinned Scorpio to keep the title. Main event was the first tag title match with Eliminators vs. Gangstas, which is going to be the main event feud for a while. New Jack and Saturn did wind up brawling in the crowd, but it was described as a disappointing match, with New Jack legitimately knocking himself out by missing a leap off the top rope with a chair and having the chair hit his own head when Saturn moved. They actually had to do some impromptu stuff until New Jack got his bearings back because he was limp and they couldn't get him up to do the total elimination. New Jack's head was busted open hard way when he got cold-cocked by the chair. On the undercard, Big Titan came out in a total Razor Ramon getup as Slice and Dice Ramirez with the toothpick and the slicked hair and the Cuban accent. Raven beat Chris Jericho in the ECW title match, which was a disappointment as well. The other weekend show was May 17th in Glenolden, Pennsylvania, before 250 fans. During the Raven vs. Whipwreck title match, Richards and Meanie did their American Males gimmick and started singing. Then JT Smith came out and began singing Sinatra before Whipwreck cleared all three from the ring. In singles matches, Cronus beat Mustafa and New Jack pinned Saturn. The first meeting of Scorpio vs. Jericho was a Japanese-style match, which I'm told was a good match that didn't get over with the crowd. After the match, Douglas jumped Scorpio and Jericho tried to save Scorpio, but Douglas hit him in the mouth with a TV title as Jericho tried to tope Douglas. Scorpio made a comeback and had Douglas pinned while Jericho counted to 3. Douglas then challenged anyone in the dressing room, and Bad Crew came out and he destroyed them. Main event saw Brian Lee beat Dreamer in a Falls Count Anywhere match which went out of the building and into someone's front yard with fans chanting ECW, ECW in the street. Bruise Brothers interfered to give Lee the win. ECW lost its 5 p.m. time slot on Sports Channel Philadelphia effective the first week of June. They'll maintain the other 3 weekly slots, 11 p.m. Tuesday night, 2 a.m. Friday and 1 a.m. Monday. They've added Channel 48 in the Philadelphia area for Wednesday night at 10 p.m. and Tuesday at midnight showings. May 31st in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania is a battle royal. Winner meets Raven that night, and the second-to-last survivor meets Douglas for the TV title that night. June 1st at ECW Arena is Eliminators vs. Gangstas for the tag titles, Douglas vs. Scorpio for TV title, Dreamer and Pitbulls vs. Bruise Brothers and Lee in a Falls Count Anywhere elimination match. The latest target date for a first pay-per-view is the fall, perhaps the November to Remember show. At the last Philadelphia show, the reason the stuff in the post-match with Sabu and Rob Van Dam came off so clumsy is that Sabu was legit knocked silly by a brainbuster off the top rope and was dizzy in the ring and taken to the back, brought back out to say respect, and then carried out on a stretcher because he was so dizzy. Since Sabu is in Japan this week, the next Sabu Van Dam match won't be until June 22nd at the ECW Arena, either in an I Quit or stretcher matches that is being groomed to be a blowout show. They are apparently setting up an angle to bring New Jack's wife back. She did an angle a few shows back but hasn't been heard from since, and end up in a dance-off against Kimona. Van Dam was over big as a heel in both cities. Among the weekend injuries with Pitbull number 1, staph infection in leg, Whipwreck, shoulder, Jericho, eye swollen, and Raven. Foot still hurting. Dreamer took a groin kick which actually landed and he was hurting bad but ended up being okay. A correction from last week. During the Jericho vs. Whipwreck match at the ECW Arena, the fans weren't chanting "This match sucks," they were chanting "This ref sucks" because Paul Richards' near falls counts were screwing up the match. There is talk of running a show at Roseland in Manhattan in late June. June 3, 1996. Complete lineup for June 1st at ECW Arena is Eliminators vs. Gangstas for ECW tag title. Shane Douglas defends TV title against Too Cold Scorpio. Brian Pillman will do an interview. Sandman vs. Stevie Richards. They're billing that Richards will serve Missy Hyatt with a deposition on the sexual harassment lawsuit at the building that night. Tommy Dreamer and Pitbulls vs. Brian Lee and Bruise Brothers. Rob Van Dam vs. Mikey Whipwreck. Devon Storm vs. El Puerto Ricano and more. ECW starts on broadcast TV in Philadelphia on WGTW Channel 48, Wednesday nights at 10 p.m. and Tuesdays at midnight. Paul Heyman has been attempting to find a UFC fighter to come in and put Taz over since he's got Taz doing an Ultimate Fighter gimmick. One name that was brought up was Paul Verlin, since Verlin has interest in doing pro wrestling and will probably wrestle in Dallas shortly. The plan is to make June 22nd a blowout show called Hardcore Heaven 96. May 31st in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania has Sandman vs. Taz plus a battle royal. June 10, 1996. Although there were some memorable highlights such as Brian Pillman, Prostitute Divine Brown of Hugh Grant fame, and UFC's Paul Verlin's doing angles, overall the June 1st ECW Arena show was regarded as a lackluster show highlighted by a strong angle with Verlin's vs. Taz. The show started strong but fizzled as it went on, perhaps because of backstage tension when New Jack went off on Pillman in what everyone who saw it swore was unplanned and I'm told was a shoot, but it appears almost nobody in the outside world, since it involves a Paul Heyman show and Pillman believes anything involving them could be legit. Crowd was estimated at 1,025 with 2 sets of bleachers no longer there but the building full. During a match with Rob Van Dam vs. Mikey Whipwreck, Pillman, who looked to be about 180 pounds with his face still swollen from the Humvee wreck, came out in a wheelchair and challenged Whipwreck, who slapped him in the face. Pillman wound up hitting Whipwreck with his crutch and Van Dam pinned him. After the match, Pillman did a TV interview running down ECW and its fans. I've heard different versions as to what he actually said, one version that he called the Gangstas niggers with attitudes and the other that he referred to the rap group with the same name and said the Gangstas have done for wrestling what NWA has done for rap music. Either way, New Jack was listening and apparently went nuts backstage in front of nobody but the wrestlers and confronted Pillman, and when people tried to explain that Pillman talked about the rap group and he wasn't calling them racial names, he wouldn't listen. It wound up with about 10 minutes of extreme tension backstage, New Jack at one point quitting and getting ready to walk out, telling Mustafa to come with him, Mustafa apologizing to Pillman for what was going on and indicating he wasn't going to walk out with New Jack. Heyman went crazy telling New Jack he's blowing his last chance with the company if he walks out and no shows the main event. A compromise was then worked out, but this sounds just too weird, where New Jack agreed to come back and work the main event if he could do an interview in front of the fans about Pillman, and for some reason Heyman agreed, which turned out to be a mistake because it wound up killing the main event. It sure reads like an angle, though. Back to the real show. JT Smith and Little Guido beat Bubba Ray Dudley and Devon Dudley, and afterwards Devon destroyed all his brothers with chairs until Big Dick Dudley showed up to a surprisingly big pop. Match itself was terrible, falling apart when Devon slipped off the middle rope. Stevie Richards came out and said he found a woman slutty enough to be Raven's whore and introduced Divine Brown. The angle was ruined when Brown tried to walk across the ring in exceedingly high heels and kept slipping and was laughing as the angle was going on. Raven said she wasn't slutty enough and hadn't slept with enough people. Rumor has it that Raven will keep turning down women saying they aren't slutty enough, but finally wind up with Sandman's wife Peaches as his new whore to set up a feud between the two. Taz then beat Jason Helton of Calgary in what was billed as a shoot fight, which was short and entertaining, winning via choke. Joey Styles did an interview as Taz challenged anyone to come out. Styles said they had someone there who would accept his challenge, and Taz said he's been waiting for Sabu, who was in Japan. Styles said it wasn't Sabu, and Paul Verlins of UFC came to the ring and they did several pull-aparts which got great heat, with Taz telling him that UFC sucks. Apparently everyone loved Verlins, who debuts as a pro wrestler for ECW on June 8 in Reading, Pennsylvania. They had a 6-man elimination bout where the winner would get a shot at Raven's title, with Pitbulls and Tommy Dreamer beating Bruise Brothers and Brian Lee. At one point Lee choke slammed Dreamer off the stage onto and through 3 tables. Pitbull number 2 ended up pinning one of the Bruise Brothers to win in what was said to have been the best match on the show, and was then jumped by Raven, who won a short match and juiced heavy during the match. Paul Heyman then came out and announced Sabu vs. Van Dam on June 22, and said the next 90 minutes was going to be so wild that if it wasn't, he guaranteed Divine Brown would give the fans free blow jobs in the parking lot after the match. Geez, it's bad enough they make their product too sleazy for kids, not they make newsletters too sleazy for kids to read by reporting on it. Richards and Blue Meanie came out as the Blue Meanie Bloods, with Richards saying his name was Lord Stephen Richards and the other guy was Sir Meanie. Richards served papers on Missy Hyatt. A doctor came out and ordered Sandman not to wrestle, calling him by his real name of Jim Fullington. Hyatt then started making out with the doctor, who allows Sandman to wrestle. Richards quickly got Sandman in the figure 4, but Sandman got out and caned Richards and pinned him in a quick match. New Jack did an interview asking why ECW brought in guys from WCW like Pillman that were calling him racial names when they were told to leave their racism in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and they said they were told no racism would be tolerated in ECW. New Jack then said this isn't from New Jack, this is from Jerome Young, New Jack's real name, which again sounds like a Heyman angle, and said that Pillman and Tom Zenk were caught in homosexual acts. He was more descriptive, in the showers in WCW, and he then started running down WWF, WCW, Gangstas in Paradise, Z Gangsta, etc. 2 Cold Scorpio was scheduled to regain the TV title from Shane Douglas, but he had a legit staph infection and couldn't work. This was announced at the beginning of the show and refunds were offered. Douglas demanded a match and proceeded to beat in quick succession El Puerto Ricano, Don E. Allen, Devon Storm, and Whipwreck. Several wrestlers came to clean up the ring, included Pitbull number 2, and Douglas challenged him, calling him Anthony, his real name. This is turning into a pattern, and said he wanted a shoot. Douglas then started calling Francine the biggest whore in ECW and she slapped him. He then gave her a belly-to-belly suplex and PB number 2 hit the ring. It started strong, but as they started wrestling on the mat, the crowd got restless with boring and "Where's our blowjobs" chants. PB number 2 won the TV title in an upset, turning an attempt at a Frankensteiner off the top into a super bomb. Eliminators beat Gangstas in a disappointing main event that lacked heat. It was good when they were outside the ring, including New Jack powerbomb Cronus in a pickup truck, but it was dead in the ring. The Gangstas in Paradise, Samula and Matthew Anoya, just recently fired by WWF, interfered. Saturn bled from reopening a bad cut from the previous night. Gangstas in Paradise attacked Gangstas in another dead angle. Heyman blamed the interview the Gangstas did before the match with killing the heat in the main event. Pitbull number 1 will be out for 2 months with a torn bicep. Former boxer Randy Tex Cobb was at the show. The other weekend show was May 31st in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania, before 325 fans. Scorpio won a battle royal to get a shot at Raven's title, which he lost. The rest of the matches were based on order of elimination. Bad Crew number 1 faced number 2 when Damian Kane interfered, so number 1 won, then both crew members went after Kane and Storm made the save. Don Harris pinned Ron Harris in a terrible match, or was it the other way around? Ron actually won, then the ref raised Don's hand and he was announced as the winner. In a match against Pitbull number 2, Perry Saturn tried an Aussie moonsault but wound up landing head first on the floor and busted himself open really bad. Douglas beat Cronus next with Saturn, all bandaged up, coming out to help. Saturn was bleeding like crazy through the bandages. Taz beat Sandman. Sandman's knee was in bad shape and he really couldn't work, and Todd Gordon told him he wasn't going to let him wrestle. Hyatt then started making out with Gordon and he let him wrestle. Gordon threw in the towel for Sandman when he was being choked out. They are apparently going to do a Sandman and Missy vs. Taz and Bill Alfonso match on June 21st. Raven juiced like crazy again in his title match with Scorpio. June 22nd at ECW Arena has Sabu vs. Van Dam, Taz vs. Verlin, Dreamer vs. Brian Lee with all weapons legal, and Pitbull number 2 defending the TV title against Douglas. June 8th in Reading, Pennsylvania has Eliminators defending against Gangstas, Raven vs. Sandman, Pitbull number 2 vs. Douglas, Dreamer vs. Lee. Falls count anywhere. A balcony is scheduled to be in the ECW Arena to increase capacity in the fall. June 24, 1996. Only show of the week was June 14th in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. Crowd was way down, ECW having reported it as 385. The Paul Verlin's Jason Helton shoot fights don't look realistic at all. Sandman didn't appear to be able to work, although part of it is an angle where he comes to the ring on crutches and tries to work rather than forfeit the match, and lost quickly to Taz. Taz also choked out the ref and Todd Gordon, and Bill Alfonso choked out Missy Hyatt. Eliminators beat Gangstas in a tag title match, which was their best match so far, with much better heat than Philadelphia. Main event saw Raven beat Tommy Dreamer to keep the ECW title. Raven juiced heavy and the match wound up as a bloodbath. They brawled in the parking lot. Bruise Brothers and Brian Lee all interfered, and Axel Rotten ended up turning heel at the end by counting the pinfall after the ref was KO'd despite seeing all the interference. Perry Saturn was shooting a House of Pain MTV video this past week. Upcoming lineups are June 21st in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania with Sabu vs. Shane Douglas, Dreamer and Gangstas vs. Lee and Bruise Brothers, Pitbull number 2 vs. Saturn for TV title, Sandman and Gordon vs. Taz and Alfonso, Chris Jericho vs. Rob Van Dam, and more. June 22nd Hardcore Heaven at ECW Arena is Sabu vs. Van Dam, Taz vs. Verlins, Pitbull number 2 vs. Jericho for TV title, Eliminators vs. Bruise Brothers for tag title, Douglas vs. Mikey Whipwreck, Dreamer vs. Lee and the Samoan Gangsta Party, Matthew and Samula Anoya. Will work. June 29th in Middletown, New York has Raven vs. Sandman for the title, Eliminators vs. Gangstas for tag title, Dreamer vs. Lee weapons match, Pitbull number 2 vs. Jericho for TV title, and Douglas vs. Whipwreck. June 30th in Deer Park, New York at the Community Center has Raven vs. Dreamer for the title, Pitbull number 2 vs. Douglas for TV title, and Brian Pillman will be at that show. July 1st, 1996. Between the sound system going out in the ring and ring cables breaking, it wasn't until about 12:30 a.m. that the Sabu vs. Rob Van Dam main event at the June 22nd ECW Arena event went into the ring. 2 minutes into that match, the top rope broke. The two basically ignored it and went through with their scheduled match, with the show ending at about 12:45 a.m. with both Sabu and Van Dam doing stretcher jobs after Sabu had scored the win using the Arabian Facebuster, despite the fact the top ropes were broken. In the process, it appeared Sabu re-injured his hand. Thus ended Hardcore Heaven 96, one of ECW's best shows, according to most reports. We did also get several negative complaints regarding the show, citing it lasted too long and about all the mechanical problems, certainly its longest, and the company's all-time record crowd as well. A crowd reported in excess of 1,500 jammed the ECW arena for a 5-hour-long show. The show had more technical down points than ever before, but even more amazing up points. Besides the ring problems, which Paul Heyman after the show was blaming on Al Pulling, 911, who runs Ted Petty's ring business, who he claimed gave them a bad ring, blaming it on ECW giving Brian Lee the choke slam finishing move. There was another major in-ring hurdle in regard to the much-hyped Taz vs. Paul Verlin's called shoot fight. The match was actually the second most hyped match on the show, stemming from an angle 3 weeks earlier. The idea was to create the idea that Taz was a world-class shooter by having him beat a proven UFC fighter. However, Verlins refused to do a clean job several days before the show. Since Heyman knew there could be problems in the ring and the match could stink up the joint, he moved it too early in the show. A compromise finish was worked out where Perry Saturn dropkicked Verlins from the top rope, allowing Taz to give Verlins a suplex and use the choke finisher in 2:24. After the match, Taz turned the heat on the fans who were mad about the poor match and weak finish, saying that he could have beaten Verlins clean, but it would have made all the ECW fans happy to see an ECW guy stretch a UFC guy. He didn't want to make the fans happy. There was tremendous heat regarding Verlins in the days leading to the show, including a possibility that he wouldn't show up. He also missed a scheduled session working out the match 4 days beforehand. The tension got so serious that Heyman was saying that in a true shoot, Taz, who has wrestling and judo background, would destroy Verlins easily, because the whole idea of this match was designed to get people to believe Taz was real, like a true shoot has anything to do with any of this. Heyman also stationed numerous heel wrestlers at ringside for the match, both Eliminators, Shane Douglas, and Rob Van Dam, presumably in case there were problems in the ring. Verlins claimed working for ECW was like being involved in the classic conch shell game. He said when they brought him in, they gave him no indication where he or the angle was going. Since he was naive to the workings of pro wrestling, he didn't recognize it initially. He credited several of the ECW wrestlers with smartening him up, telling him where it was going, warning him beforehand, and telling him he shouldn't do a clean job. Heyman claimed Verlins knew where they were going from the beginning and claimed to have signed Verlins to a contract with it specifying a choke finish and tap out. Verlins said he wished he had more practice before being thrown in there and that the two worked out once for 2 hours on the mat, but hardly worked out the match at all, and said he had no problems losing as long as it was a cheat finish, but they weren't paying enough for him to do a clean job. Plus, with him scheduled to be in the September UFC tournament, he didn't think it was a smart career move to do a clean job to a pro wrestler even in a worked match. He said Heyman was pressuring him up until the last second to do the clean finish because he told him he felt it was important not to screw the fans, and even told him he'd ruin him in the pro wrestling business for 3 years if he didn't do the clean job. Verlins claimed he's not really interested in doing pro wrestling regularly until he's done with Vale Tudo rules fighting, which is several years down the road anyway. Verlins brought up another idea for the finish, which he said Heyman first came up with and he agreed to, which would have been for the Eliminators to hit their total elimination of him before Taz put him out. Verlins said Heyman nixed that idea, claiming to him that he was splitting up the Eliminators, while Heyman said it was Verlins who came up with the idea and he wouldn't agree to it. Verlins said Taz was a great guy and that Taz even told him what they were doing to him was wrong, but laughed at the idea of guy who comes up to my waist being able to beat him or be in the league with the top guys he's faced in UFC if it was a shoot. I'm not big on going back, said Verlins, who has dabbled with the idea of pro wrestling in Dallas, even though he said he had a good time doing it. I just wanted to get it out of the way. It wasn't worth it. I don't like being treated like an idiot. If I'd have known what it was all about, I'd have never done it. Verlins also said Heyman promised him none of the footage of the match would ever air on television, and it would be saved exclusively for home video. In between came an appearance by Terry Gordy, losing to Raven in an unannounced ECW title match, and a TV title change where Chris Jericho won the title from Pitbull No. 2 in what was reported as an outstanding match. Among the other highlights was an angle where Stevie Richards presented Raven with a new valet, Sandman's real-life wife Peaches, and storyline she's his estranged wife. Sandman didn't care, saying he used to pass her around the dressing room anyway and all he cared about was when Raven was done with her. He wanted Raven to pay his bill at the end. However, Sandman's 9-year-old son Tyler came out, dressed like Raven, and Raven put Tyler in front of him and dared Sandman to cane his son. This angle was even more difficult than it sounds because the mic broke right in the middle and they had to basically stop the angle but keep things entertaining enough for a long time before continuing on with the planned angle. The angle apparently is that Sandman's son has disowned him and now worships Raven. Tommy Dreamer, after winning a weapons match from Brian Lee, took one of the most dangerous bumps of the year, being choke-slammed off a balcony near the entrance of the building through 3 tables that were piled on top of each other on the floor. Dreamer took the bump and, aside from a few splinters and being a little shaken up, wasn't seriously injured. When the ring broke and they had a lengthy delay after midnight, Kimono Wanaleo was sent out and did a striptease routine, complete with taking off her top, to keep the crowd from getting restless before the main event. Earlier in the show, Blue Meanie came out as Blue Dust, doing a Goldust gimmick, and wound up being DDT'd by Beulah McGillicuddy. Stevie Richards and Meanie, who are such an incredible act, I'm shocked nobody has gone after them harder. Al Snow's Leif Cassidy is such a pale imitation, this time also came out as Baron Von Stevie, with Richards with a head cap making him look bald and squeezing his hand doing a claw imitation, and Goose stepping around the ring and threatening Joey Styles with the claw, and Meanie as Blue Dust with the Meanie Babe as Marlena. Blood is being used again in a big way after a temporary moratorium. There had been blood on most shows of late, which the claim was originally that it was all hardware, except it was happening on every house show, often more than once, the past few weeks. Even before the show started, ring announcer Joel Gertner started telling bad jokes and Sandman ran out and caned him to a huge pop, allowing Bob Ortiz to take over. Oh, and Shane Douglas exposed himself as well. Complete results saw Douglas beat Mikey Whipwreck, who is staying with ECW with a belly-to-belly at 11:33, JT Smith and Little Guido with Sal Balomo in their corner beat Bubba Ray Dudley and Big Dick Dudley via DQ when Devon interfered in a match that went on too long. Taz over Verlins. Raven pinned Gordy with a DDT on a chair after lots of outside interference in a match where Gordy got a huge crowd pop. Raven juice like crazy for Gordy. Richards brought in barbed wire, but Gordy used it to juice Raven even more. The Eliminators Gangstas tag title match wound up with both the Bruise Brothers and Samoan Gangsta Party interfering at the very beginning. Axel Rotten and Hack Myers went to a no decision with Samoan Gangsta Party amidst lots of run-ins. Jericho pinned Pitbull number 2 to capture the TV title. Pitbull number 2 bled, although his may have been an accident. Pitbull number 2 accidentally hit Francine, who was being bothered by Douglas at ringside. Dreamer pinned Lee in a weapons match where they collected all the weapons brought by fans before the show and put them in 4 garbage cans, and the wrestlers used all of them. After the match, Dreamer took the incredible bump, and Sabu's win over Van Dam finished the show. The next ECW Arena show will be on July 13th, called Heatwave 96, with 2 gimmick matches on top. There will be a 4 corners match for the TV title with Chris Jericho, Pitbull number 2, Cold Scorpio and Shane Douglas. The main event will be a 6-man tag with Raven and Stevie Richards and Brian Lee versus Terry Gordy and Tommy Dreamer and Sandman. Raven and Sandman will be put inside of a cage. Dreamer and Lee will have a match where falls count anywhere. Gordy and Richards will start out on the stage with the idea that the first man who gets to the cage door will be let in to make it a 2-on-1. At that point the door will be locked, but guys can even it up by climbing over the cage into the ring. To make people think they won't do the obvious finish of having Richards get pinned, if Richards is the one pinned, whomever pins him gets Raven's title belt. The other weekend house show was June 21st in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania, before 400 fans. The highlight was an excellent match where Jericho was pinned by Rob Van Dam. Van Dam is probably going to face Sabu on August 3rd in a stretcher match, since Sabu will be in Japan at the time of the next show. They had a match where Taz and Bill Alfonso beat Todd Gordon and Sandman when Taz choked out Sandman in 3:18. Douglas was awarded the match over Sabu when they stopped it due to injury. Finale was the typical brawl with Lee and Bruise Brothers over Dreamer and Gangstas when they put 3 cinder blocks on Dreamer's crotch and smashed the chair on them, leading to the pin. At one point during the match they were in the parking lot smashing each other into cars. Paul Heyman said that New Jack working the show a few weeks back for Angel Amoroso, another promoter in Philadelphia who had formerly worked in ECW, wasn't against his wishes, and that he agreed to it when New Jack reimbursed Heyman half his trans from Atlanta. July 8, 1996. Pete Senerka, Taz, was upset with comments made by Paul Verlins both here and elsewhere. He said that from the start, Paul Heyman had told him Verlins had agreed to do the job, while Verlins appeared apprehensive about doing it, acting like he didn't know what the plans were for him. He said Verlins had told him he thought it would be a slow build-up rather than doing the match 3 weeks after the angle. He said in the one workout session that had at the ECW school, that Verlins had to be taught how to properly apply a front headlock and parry Sotelo, Saturn. The other coach at the school said that trap fighting, which Verlins is a black belt in, must mean that if you get in a fight, you're trapped. He doesn't know how to do anything. He's clumsy. Taz could have eaten him up, Senerka said in their match that Verlins left him several openings to tear him up. In a straight shoot, he was wide open at all times. Senerka said the fact there were several heels around the ring during the match was because it was ECW versus UFC and they wanted to show ECW heels as being unified behind him. I don't need anyone to defend me. I've lost fights before, but that kid can't beat me. Both Senerka, who wrestled for 2 years at the University of Massachusetts and 1 year at CW Post, and Heyman said that Verlins was offered the opportunity to do a shoot but turned it down. Senerka said it was in a conversation between the two when Verlins was unhappy about doing the job, and he said he'd go to Paul and see if they could both get more money because what they were going to make wasn't enough to do a shoot. He said Verlins said that it was okay. Heyman said it was in a phone conversation that all 3 were on. Senerka said he can see why the UFC people like Verlins, because he's a big guy with a good look. He's a wild puncher and he can take a good punch, and said that he doesn't want to say that Verlins was afraid of him, only that Verlins said he wasn't here to do a shoot. I've seen him and he definitely doesn't have a glass jaw. I wouldn't be this hot if he didn't make the silly comments about me being up to his waist. My size has nothing to do with it. His size is irrelevant. We're all the same size on the mat. He was wide open so many times in the match. The only reason I'm bitter is because he's crying the blues. My own feeling is that since this is pro wrestling we're talking about, as written last week, who would win in a real shoot has nothing at all to do with it. Pro wrestling is about manipulation, not reality, and the idea for Taz to fight a shooter and get a worked submission win was about manipulation, no different than what worked for Antonio Inoki for all those years. It ended up being a bad match and everyone involved seems to be unhappy in hindsight because things didn't go down as they had all hoped for whatever reason. Sandman's 9-year-old son, Tyler Fullington, was the star of the weekend with house shows on June 29th in Middletown, New York and June 30th in Deer Park, New York before an estimated 700 and 400 fans. The first night, Raven defended the title against Sandman. Sandman's knee is still bad and he really can't work, so they did the camouflage bit, which Raven is really great at. Sandman was caning everyone when Raven pulled Tyler in front of him. Sandman stopped. Later in the match, as Sandman was about to win the title, Tyler caned his father and Raven pinned him. The Middletown show was mainly brawling all over the building and people called here saying it was dangerous to be a fan because the wrestlers were running through them and fans were getting minor injuries because they couldn't get out of the way. Tommy Dreamer and Brian Lee did a spoof on the Sullivan-Benoit deal, except they went into the women's bathroom and there was a woman in there and did more damage to the bathroom. We still haven't had anyone flush anyone's head in the toilet yet, but I'm sure it's coming. In Deer Park, Raven wrestled Dreamer and they did a spoof on the Michael Smith double pin finish. When each ref raised a hand, both wrestlers simultaneously DDT'd the other ref. Bubba Ray Dudley came in to ref, but Devon Dudley hit Bubba and Dreamer with a chair and one of the refs recovered and counted the pin. After the match, Sandman ran in, but he wound up being caned by his son again. Sandman's wife, who used to be called Peaches, is now being called by her real name of Lori Fullington. In Deer Park, Eliminators had a Japanese-style hot match with Chris Jericho and Mikey Whipwreck. Told the crowds both nights were really bloodthirsty, even by ECW standards, so even though there wasn't anything that would be called good wrestling except maybe the Eliminators match with Jericho and Whipwreck, the fans came to see the brawling and the blood, both of which were provided. On this past week's TV, they aired Stevie Richards doing the Baron Von Stevie deal, doing a poor goose step and claw. It was so bad it was good. They also aired Raven vs. Terry Gordy. Gordy is nowhere close to what he once was, but they did an excellent job of hiding it, mainly by keeping the match outside the ring and just having Gordy destroy Raven with chair shots. They are trying to do the Jake Roberts comeback deal with Gordy. Actually, because Raven did such a great job of camouflaging what Gordy isn't, the fans thought Gordy was the old Gordy and went really nuts for him during the match. Louis Spicolli debuts on July 12th in Allentown and will wrestle Sabu at the arena on July 13th. Alpha the Samoan is expected to manage the Samoan Gangsta Party at least in his hometown of Allentown. Samu has just opened a wrestling gym in Pensacola but will continue to work ECW. Brian Pillman didn't appear at the Deer Park show as was the original plan. He had backed out of it several weeks ago after suffering an ankle infection, which required surgery, which has caused him to be hooked up to and for the past few weeks, which is why he had the big patch on his arm doing the WWF stuff at TV. July 12th Allentown lineup is Falls Count Anywhere with Gordy and Dreamer vs. Raven and Lee, Jericho defending TV title against Shane Douglas, ECW tag titles with Eliminators vs. Gangstas, 2 Cold Scorpio vs. Pitbull No. 2, Sandman vs. Blue Dust and Todd Gordon vs. Bill Alfonso. July 15, 1996. The July 5th and July 6th shows scheduled for Salisbury Beach, Massachusetts were both canceled due to a problem with the arena. Tarzan Goto will be working the weekend shows while Gangstas vs. Samoan Gangsta Party will take place on the July 13th ECW Arena show. Sabu vs. Rob Van Dam in a stretcher match will headline the August 3rd ECW Arena show. Vampiro Canadiense from EMLL is headed in and Paul Heyman is looking at using EMLL wrestlers. ECW debuts on July 27th in Warwick, Pennsylvania with Tommy Dreamer and Terry Gordy vs. Raven and Brian Lee, Sandman vs. Taz, Chris Jericho vs. Shane Douglas for the TV title, Eliminators vs. Dudleys, and more. Sandman's son is turning into another Macaulay Culkin in that he's basically stealing the show. ECW will air on the Univision affiliate in Boston, Channel 27, at 1 a.m. Fridays, and on Channel 39 in Burlington, Vermont in the same slot, and is expected to start on Empire Sports Cable Sundays at 11 p.m. July 22, 1996. ECW drew the largest crowd in its history once again for its July 13th show at the ECW Arena in South Philadelphia. While no real figures are or will be available, the crowd was said to be larger than for the show 3 weeks earlier, which had set what at the time was the company's record. The last crowd was estimated at between 1,200 and 1,550, and at this show there was literally almost no walking space available in the tiny building because fans were so packed in. Getting real crowds for ECW Arena is basically impossible as based on pressure from outside sources. The State Athletic Commission won't release figures for ECW shows, although when figures were available they were always significantly lower than estimates elsewhere. In some cases figures were so much lower that it was clear those figures couldn't have been accurate, as few months ago for a packed house show, we received a figure from the commission that the paid crowd was in the 400s, and it is pretty well known the ECW shows aren't significantly papered. Crowd estimates from various attendees at the July 13th show ranged from 1,300 to the figure of 1,700 claimed, with most estimates in between. The show was said to have been among the best in company history when it came to crowd reactions, as every storyline got a huge response and there were standing ovations at the end of several matches. The highlight match, said to be one of the better matches in company history, was a Four Corners match for the ECW TV title with Chris Jericho, Pitbull No. 2, Shane Douglas and 2 Cold Scorpio. It wound up with Douglas versus Pitbull. As Pitbull had Douglas pinned, Francine turned on Pitbull, then pulled off her skirt to reveal panties that had franchise written on them. Pitbull No. 1 came out and it wound up with Francine being super bombed through a table. After that point, Douglas and Pitbull traded near falls before Douglas won the title clean with a belly-to-belly suplex in a match that lasted more than 30 minutes. The main event on the show was a bout with Sandman and Raven in a cage, Brian Lee and Tommy Dreamer brawling all over the place, and Terry Gordy and Stevie Richards battling over who could get in the cage first to make it a 2-on-1. In a bloodbath, it wound up with Raven being handcuffed with his hands spread as if he were being crucified, to repeat the spot from last year that is in the show's openings where Dreamer destroys him with a chair. At this point, Dreamer had a chair and Sandman, who was noticeably bothered by his bad knee, which he seems to blow out doing minor things on a weekly basis because he isn't taking time off to rest it, had his cane, but Sandman's son Tyler jumped in front of Raven and spread his arms. Sandman stopped in his tracks, but Dreamer still wanted to swing the chair and Sandman and Dreamer argued over that spot. Later in the match was a spot where 3 tables were set up on top of each other outside the ring. Dreamer was sitting on the top of the cage and Lee was standing inside the cage on the top rope and basically shoved Dreamer off. It was supposed to be a choke slam but really didn't come off as one, and Dreamer for the second show in a row took the bump through 3 tables. The match ended with Sandman pinning Raven, which no doubt will lead to title matches down the line. Among the other show highlights was the return of 911 and the debuts of Tarzan Goto and Louis Spicolli. We don't have complete details as to the behind-the-scenes of the 911 deal, although apparently it was a twofold deal. After 911 had refused to do Paul Heyman's original plan several months ago, to put Taz over as a giant killer, which ended with him leaving the promotion, and the Paul Verhoeven situation backfired, Heyman finally got the deal done. As Joel Gertner was doing a heel ring announcer bit, 911's music played and he came out and choke-slammed Gertner. He then choke-slammed Taz, who was in the ring with Bill Alfonso as part of the angle. As he went for Alfonso, Taz popped up from 911's trademark spot, suplexed him on his head and choked him out. In post-show interviews, Brian Lee did an interview basically saying that he was the king of the choke slams, so it's not clear whether 911 was brought in for the one shot and came in simply to keep the contract supplying the rings for ECW, or if he's back and had to do this angle as a punishment to get his job back. Goto, from IWA in Japan, which ECW is running 2 shows in conjunction with on August 10th and August 11th in Yokohama and Tokyo respectively, beat Axel Rotten both on July 12th in Allentown and again at the arena, largely for Japanese photo ops. Goto is an ECW-style brawler, but really didn't get over that big in either city. Spicolli was said to have surprised everyone having a strong match with Sabu, although they were said to have went too long and Sabu appeared to have missed his planned finisher. The highlight of that match was Sabu moonsaulting off the top rope outside the ring and sending Spicolli through a table. Other notes from the July 13th ECW arena. Inside Edition was their filming for an upcoming segment. The opener saw the Gangstas destroy the Samoan Gangsta tribe in 2:30. This was basically Heyman having an ECW team destroy a WWF team, even though the latter never actually worked as a team on WWF television other than standing in the aisle. Mikey Whipwreck beat Paul Loria, and after the match the Eliminators did a run-in and destroyed Mikey and then challenged Sabu. Mikey and Sabu came out for an impromptu tag match which was said to have been very good, ending when they used the total elimination on Mikey. The Dudleys, Bubba Ray and Dances with and Big Dick, beat JT Smith and Little Guido and Big Guido, area indie wrestler Primo Carnera 3, in a match reported as being totally messed up when Dick pinned Big Guido. The match was basically to set up another Big Dick vs. D-Von confrontation which got great heat. On July 12 in Allentown, Pennsylvania, before an estimated 900 main event saw Terry Gordy and Tommy Dreamer beat Raven and Brian Lee in a brawl all over the building. Eliminators beat Gangstas in a bloody bath among the top matches. Crowd was pretty hot for most of the show. Best match was said to have been a draw with Chris Jericho defending the TV title against Shane Douglas. There were some reported bad matches on the show as well, Sabu vs. Hack Myers and in particular a Bad Crew tag match against Havoc Incorporated that was embarrassing. Only matches we know of for August 3rd at ECW Arena are Sabu vs. Rob Van Dam in a stretcher match, Eliminators, Gangstas, Samoan Gangsta Tribe and Bruise Brothers in a Four Corners tag match and perhaps Sandman vs. Raven for the title, although that hasn't been confirmed. Talk of people like Vampiro, Dr. Wagner Jr. and Johnny Smith headed in. On Los Angeles Prime, not sure if this holds true for anywhere else, the show has been moved from 2 a.m. on Friday nights to 3 a.m. on Monday nights. Exaggeration of the week. The three-table bump Dreamer took on the previous show off the elevated section near the balcony was billed on television as a 25-foot drop. If it was, then the Bruise Brothers, who were setting up the table, are about 23 feet tall each. July 29, 1996. The television situation in New York is expected to change this week. About the only thing definite is that ECW won't be on after a few more weeks in its regular Sunday night time slot on MSG Cable, although it will air during the Prime feed. There was a minor incident backstage at the arena show involving Taz and 911. After being choked out, the idea was that 911 was going to sell it until they brought out smelling salts to revive him. 911 ended up getting up too soon and Taz had words with him backstage about it and Big Dick Dudley ended up in the middle. At this point there are no plans for 911 to be brought back, but he did get a huge pop for his return, so nothing is etched in stone. They are teasing a split between Perry Saturn and John Cronus since Saturn is making subtle remarks on interviews about my belts. New Jack did a television interview calling Jim Cornette a closet racist and the Gangstas claimed Cornette owed them money. Apparently this was a combination of the Gangstas' idea and also Paul Heyman's retribution for 3 letters Cornette wrote over the years in The Observer knocking ECW and a recent online message where Cornette said something to the effect of that Heyman was someone who would rather climb up a tree and lie than stay on the ground and tell the truth. Johnny Smith debuts on August 2nd and August 3rd. Upcoming shows are July 26th in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania with Tommy Dreamer and Terry Gordy vs. Bruise Brothers. Shane Douglas defends TV title against Pitbull. Number 2, Eliminators defend tag titles against Chris Jericho and Mikey Whipwreck. Raven defends ECW title against Devon Storm and Taz and Bill Alfonso vs. Sandman and Todd Gordon. July 27th in Warwick, Pennsylvania has Dreamer and Gordy vs. Raven and Brian Lee Douglas vs. Jericho for TV strap. Gangstas vs. Bruise Brothers, Sandman vs. Taz and Eliminators defend tag titles against Dudleys. August 2nd in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania has Sabu vs. Jericho, Dreamer and Gangstas and Pitbull. Number 2 vs. Douglas and Lee and Eliminators in an elimination match and Sandman and 2 Cold Scorpio vs. Raven and Richards. August 3rd at ECW Arena has Raven vs. Sandman, Sabu vs. Van Dam stretcher match and the Four Corners tag title match with Eliminators, Gangstas, Bruise Brothers, and Samoan Gangsta Party. ECW debuts August 17th at the Astoria Sports Complex in Queens and runs Deer Park, New York on August 18th. August 5th, 1996. The final ECW show in the regular Sunday night time slot on MSG Cable would have aired on July 28th. The station changed. Program directors and the new director canceled the show. ECW will air on about 40% of the MSG affiliates with the Prime broadcast, and they were expected to sign a deal on Channel 31 in New York, which is a business/sports station, for Saturday nights at 1 a.m., which may start as early as this coming weekend. Sandman has moved back to Philadelphia from Utah, where he had been working a regular job at. Dulo will replace Kimono on the Japanese tour. Paul Heyman's plan at this point is to air both Raven vs. Tommy Dreamer and Eliminators vs. Takashi Okano and Keisuke Yamada title defenses from August 11th at Korakuen Hall on the TV show that airs on August 13th. Gary Albright has been talked with about coming in, but it probably won't be for several more months. Vampiro's debut will likely be on the August 24th card. Heyman wanted him on August 3rd, but before Heyman confirmed the date with Vampiro, Vampiro got himself booked for that weekend on shows in the Cancun area of Mexico. Originally, the idea was to put Vampiro vs. Luis Piccoli on the August 3rd show. Chris Jericho's last date is August 3rd, while the Bruise Brothers will either finish up on August 3rd or August 24th. Raven missed the weekend shows due to pneumonia, while Pitbull #2 missed the date in Jim Thorpe because he was arrested and I believe not charged as part of a bar fight the previous night. Actually, Raven was at the July 26th Jim Thorpe show but was so sick he couldn't work, so they ran an angle where he challenged Sandman, who came out and all the heels jumped Sandman, and that was the extent of his activities. That crowd was up to 500 to 600, while July 27th debut in Warwick, Pennsylvania drew 860 with Taz and Brian Lee beating Terry Gordy and Tommy Dreamer. Lee used the Asiatic spike on Gordy to leave him laying while Taz choked out Dreamer and Bill Alfonso choked out Beulah. This set up an angle that is to air on this week's television where Dreamer wants to get Terry Funk as his partner for the August 3rd Philadelphia show, but Gordy talks him out of it and gives him a partner's name, but the name will be kept secret until match time. August 2nd in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania is Sabu vs. Chris Jericho elimination match with Dreamer and Pitbull #2 and Gangstas vs. Shane Douglas and Lee and Eliminators, Sandman and 2 Cold Scorpio vs. Raven and Stevie Richards, Rob Van Dam vs. Hack Myers and Johnny Smith vs. Piccoli. Added to August 3rd at ECW Arena are Scorpio vs. Jericho and Douglas defending TV title against Pitbull #2 along with the Dreamer and vs. Lee and Taz match. August 14th, 1996. Steve Williams debuted on ECW's August 3rd show at the arena drawing 1,500 teaming with Tommy Dreamer to lose to Taz and Brian Lee when Lee pinned Dreamer. Sabu over Van Dam, Scorpio over Jericho in his last ECW match, and Gangstas winning a 4-team elimination over Bruise Brothers, Samoan Gangstas and Eliminators to take the tag belts also on show. ECW lost its New York time slot before the first show aired. Apparently Channel 31 took one look at the tape, which was bought as an infomercial rather than regular programming, and decided it would never air anything of that type. It's been said before and it'll be said again, the lifeblood of wrestling in this country is television. And if ECW persists on having all the blood, the angles where the women get beat up and the swearing audible from the crowd chants and bleeping in interviews as a constant on the show, they aren't going to take anything but little baby steps when it comes to growth. Pitbull #1 Gary Wolfe suffered a broken neck and will be out of action for quite some time. They are playing it up as a skull fracture, which it wasn't, and a career ender, which it isn't expected to be but is very serious. August 19th, 1996. ECW in conjunction with the IWA ran 2 shows in Japan over the weekend, performing before its 2 largest crowds in history. Overall, the tour has to be considered a mixed bag. The first show on August 10th at the Yokohama Bunka Gym drew about 1,800 fans in a 4,900-seat arena. The show was described as poor, with no matches better than 2 stars and even below the level of the poor August 1st FMW show in Tokyo. In the matches involving ECW wrestlers, Bubba Ray Dudley pinned Katsumi Hirano in 3:37 in a terrible match. It was scheduled as both an NWA and IWA tag title match with Tarzan Goto and Mr. Ganasuke defending against the Eliminators. However, Ganasuke has a badly blown out knee and is expected out of action for several months. It switched to a non-title handicap match with Goto taking both on, and wound up with Cronus pin Goto, who juiced, after a splash onto a desk, in 8:53. The main event had Terry Gordy, who was reported to us as the most over wrestler on the show, although Heyman said Raven was the most over, and Tommy Dreamer beat Stevie Richards and Raven in 13:08 when Dreamer pinned Richards. Raven, who really shouldn't be working because of a foot injury, did nothing here as he was attempting to save himself for his title defense the next night. Richards was the only one of the 4 who did much of anything. Patricia attacked Dreamer during this match, but Dreamer punched her. There was little heat for anything on the show and the work quality was said to have been poor. There were said to have been a few pockets of fans into ECW, but for the most part it was a dead crowd. The August 11th show at Korakuen Hall was the About Face, drawing a sellout crowd of 2,000, with probably close to half the fans in the building wearing ECW t-shirts and being totally into everything including chants of ECW. It was said to have been a good card with good heat. In comparison with the LLPW show that was held noon that same day and also drew a sellout, headlined by a 6-man tag team match with a team captained by Shinobu Kondori against a team captained by Chigusa Nagio, the work and heat were better for the LLPW show. In the main event, Goto retained his IWA title, pinning Dudley in 4:38. Dudley got a good reaction and did a running dive over the top rope, which is impressive for someone of his size. Raven kept the ECW title, pinning Dreamer in 11:08 when Raven hit Dreamer with a chair after Dreamer had pile-driven Patricia. Both juiced, as did Richards, who interfered freely and brawled all over the building. This match was to have aired on the ECW television show on August 13. The Eliminators vs. Keisuke Yamada and Takashi Okano was really strange. According to those there live, it was announced as being an ECW tag team title match, although Eliminators did not have the belts. However, they read a proclamation announcing it as a title match, and the ring announcer billed them as ECW Tag Team Champions. Eliminators, of course, lost the belts on August 3rd in Philadelphia to the Gangstas in a four-way dance, but had been scheduled all along to have a title match on this show. The immediate belief regarding the surprise title change, Paul Heyman claimed it was simply the right thing to do that night and it wasn't something he was planning on doing but felt he had to, in Japan, was that Heyman didn't want his tag team champs losing to an outside team, since before Genosuke's injury, they would have had to have lost the NWA-IWA tag title match the night before. So did the title switch, because that's Japanese mentality about not wanting a group's champion to lose to outsiders. Heyman claims when he got to Japan he told the office about the title switch and refused to allow them to bill it as an ECW tag title match. Suggestions were made to bill it as an ECW International Tag Team title match, which Heyman said that he nixed because ECW only has one set of tag champions, and according to Heyman, he claimed it was Eliminators billed at the show as the #1 international contenders for the IWA tag team titles. However, in checking again with people there, they claimed the proclamation and ring announcement said it was an ECW tag title match, and that the fans in the building who follow ECW closely were really surprised because word of the title change the previous week had spread to the hardcore fans. The newspapers the next day all reported it as an ECW tag team title match, although at least one of the magazines, in order to avoid confusion since the magazines print ECW results, reported the match as being for the ECW International Tag Team titles. The Eliminators were said to have been over the least of the ECW crew and won the match in 14:01 when Saturn pinned Okano in what was actually more of a too-long squash match, with Eliminators doing some nice moves and selling little. Richards beat Matsuda in 5:38 in what was said to have been an acceptable short match. Richards got over the biggest of all the ECW wrestlers with the crowd since he did the Public Enemy dancing in the crowd, which is something rarely done in Japan, and the fans really got into it. Richards also worked smart for that audience in that he did the hot Japanese moves like an STF, and I believe a dragon screw, before winning with a super kick, Stevie kick. Some notes on the August 3rd ECW Arena show. It opened with Stevie Richards, Supernova, Blue Meanie and Don E. Allen dressed up like the rock band Kiss playing I Wanna Rock and Roll All Night in one of the single greatest skits I've ever seen in my life. Sandman came out and caned all of them, singing I Wanna Kick Your Ass All Night, and Party Every Day as he caned them. Raven Tyler and Lori Fullington came out and it wound up with Richards superkicking Sandman and Raven hitting him in the eye with the cane. Sandman juiced heavily to set up their match later in the show. Mikey Whipwreck retained the European Junior title, which he won the previous night in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania from Dirt Bike Kid, who is an indie wrestler in England who made his own belt to work in ECW, beating Devon Storm. Johnny Smith debuted beating Louis Spicolli. Fans didn't know much about Smith, but he was a good worker but lacked charisma. Axel Rotten and Devon Dudley had a match mainly with stiff chair shots going to a no decision until Big Dick chased Devon away. Raven couldn't wrestle because of his foot injury, so Richards defended the title for him against Sandman. Sandman ended up pinned by Raven when it was all over after lots of outside interference. Lori Fullington attacked Missy Hyatt, who was being de-emphasized. Too Cold Scorpio pinned Chris Jericho with a first-ever ECW shooting star press. After the match, Jericho, in his final match, praised ECW and the fans and got a nice send-off. Pitbull #1 Gary Wolfe came out announcing his broken neck, which is legit, before the Shane Douglas TV title defense against Pitbull #2. Wolfe got the broken neck when he landed wrong from a DDT by Douglas at the last show. Brian Lee and Taz beat Steve Williams and Tommy Dreamer when Lee choke slammed Dreamer onto a garbage can. The big spot of the match, which went about 7 minutes and wasn't that good, was Dreamer taking a Taz T-bone suplex off the top of the stage onto a table on the bottom level. During the match, Bill Alfonso attacked Beulah McGillicuddy, who somehow during the melee broke her wrist legit. Gangstas won the four-way match to take the belts. Samoa and Gangstas came out in handcuffs and were pinned quickly. Bruise Brothers were pinned by Eliminators after one of them got the total elimination. Eliminators went for total elimination on New Jack, but he ducked and Cronus ended up kicking Saturn. New Jack came off the top rope with a chair for the pin. Cronus and Saturn argued after the match. Sabu beat Rob Van Dam is a stretcher match described as very good with a lot of variations on the usual spots. Referee Paul Richards is talking about booking shows in New England. Several New York area dates have been cancelled after losing television. It has been reported that Kimona is through here. That may be true and may not be true, and that she was done at one point, but they may bring her back. She was pulled from the Japan tour and replaced by Beulah. The August 18th show in Deer Park, New York was cancelled. However, the August 17th show in Staten Island is still on. That show at the Sportsfest has 3 title bouts with Raven vs. Sandman, Douglas vs. Pitbull No. 2 and Gangstas vs. Samoan Gangstas plus Sabu vs. Van Dam, Vampiro Debut vs. Louis Piccoli, Scorpio vs. Saturn, Whipwreck vs. Cronus and Dreamer, and Gordy vs. Lee and Richards, and the return of the rock band Kiss, or a reasonable facsimile. August 23rd in Reading, Pennsylvania, billed as Requiem for a Pitbull to tribute Gary Wolf, has Eliminators vs. Dreamer and Gordy, Raven and Laurie vs. Missy and Sandman, and Gangstas vs. Samoan Gangstas. ECW Arena on August 24th is Sandman and Pitbull No. 2 vs. Douglas and Raven, Gordy vs. Lee in a Bad Street match, Missy vs. Laurie, and Dreamer vs. Taz. August 26, 1996. Biggest news from the Lone Weekend show on August 17th in Staten Island, New York, which drew 1,033 fans paying $20,515 were the injuries. Stevie Richards suffered 1 broken rib and several bruised ribs when Blue Meanie did a moonsault on him and his knee accidentally cracked a rib. Both Missy Hyatt and Laurie Fullington had their arms and elbows banged up swinging canes at each other. We don't know the extent of Hyatt's injuries, but it was feared she may have suffered a broken elbow, but the elbow was very swollen and she was hospitalized. Fullington's elbow was pretty swollen as well, but she wasn't hospitalized. Raven may have had foot surgery this week. At the card, Raven beat Sandman with a DDT to keep the ECW title. 2 Cold Scorpio pinned Perry Saturn in what was said to have been the best match on the show. Terry Gordy and Tommy Dreamer beat Richards and Brian Lee. Shane Douglas beat Pitbull No. 2 to keep the TV title. The Gangstas beat Samoan Gangstas to keep the tag titles. Sam Anoa'i missed the card because of a family funeral, so Lloyd Anoa'i subbed under the name LA Smooth, and Sabu beat Rob Van Dam on top. Vampiro's debut, set for this show, was postponed again due to him blowing out his knee. Reggie Bennett is tentatively slated to debut on the September 14th show and will almost for sure be booked against a male undercard wrestler. Though this isn't confirmed, there is talk in Japan that Manami Toyota, Mima Shimoda, Tsuko Mita, and Toshio Yamada are booked for the December 13th show at the ECW Arena. The television show this past week was largely taped from Korakuen Hall in Tokyo. While it wasn't the best ECW show ever by a long shot, ECW did a better job getting its company over as an international success on its television in tiny Korakuen Hall than either WWF or WCW have been able to do, drawing huge crowds at the Tokyo Dome in the past. The crowd was pretty similar to an ECW arena crowd, with the funniest thing being them chanting, in English, "He's hardcore" at Tommy Dreamer. The Eliminators were announced in Japanese at ECW Tag Team Champions but didn't have any belts, but obviously it wasn't announced that way in English on television. Their opponents, Takashi Okano and Keisuke Yamada, looked pretty bad. Raven Dreamer was about what you'd expect, with the highlight actually being Richards' interference. Except for the chants the fans learned from either seeing the tapes or magazine coverage, the crowd reactions for the show were typical for a better-than-average indie card at Korakuen Hall. There were 2 different Japanese tours at the Staten Island show. They also were at the Clash in Denver and SummerSlam, and so merchandise sales were way above usual. August 23rd in Reading, Pennsylvania, billed as Requiem for a Pitbull has Van Dam vs. Pitbull No. 2, Eliminators vs. Dreamer and Gordy, Raven and Laurie Fullington vs. Sandman, and Missy and Gangstas vs. Samoan Gangstas for tag titles. August 24th at ECW Arena is headlined by a Natural Born Killers match, which is a cage match with weapons at the top of the cage, with Gangstas vs. Eliminators, Raven and Douglas vs. Pitbull No. 2 and Sandman, Gordy vs. Lee in a Bad Street match, Hyatt vs. Laurie Fullington, Taz vs. Dreamer, and Big Dick and Bubba Ray Dudley vs. Devon Dudley and Axel Rotten. There are negotiations, far from finalized, to do shows on October 11th in New Orleans and October 12th in Biloxi, Mississippi. September 2, 1996. Missy Hyatt, Damian Kane and Lady Alexander are all through with the promotion. Hyatt wasn't technically fired as there is a chance she'll still be involved with promotion of a 1997 wrestling calendar that she was producing with photos of the various ECW women, but she won't be on television, at the arenas or part of the storylines. It was basically a deal where she was blamed for Kimona quitting the promotion as the two were friends. She was written out of the script at the ECW arena show when Stevie Richards said he's drop his sexual harassment lawsuit against her if she'd leave Sandman, which she agreed to do, then ran him down, and Sandman proceeded to cane the hell out of her for her exit. Kane and Alexander were then fired because Kane made some sort of remarks about Paul Heyman asking Alexander to take Missy's spot in the match against Lori Fullington, which she did, but I guess it caused more problems. Kane was being used mainly because he promoted the ECW shows in Reading, Pennsylvania, and because it was his license ECW had been using since the split with Ed Zone over the fire incident last year. However, Heyman has gotten himself a promoter's license for Pennsylvania. The August 24th ECW arena show drew another packed house of an estimated 1,400. The main event was a weapons cage match in which masked guys on the top of the cage handed Gangstas and Eliminators weapons to use. It was the expected bloodbath, with Perry Saturn being the star of the match, coming off the top of the cage several times. At one point, one of the masked men hit New Jack with a guitar, which turned out to be Shane Douglas as he unmasked, but New Jack kicked out. Finish saw Saturn on the top of the cage once again, but New Jack threw a garbage can at him and he took a bump off the top of the cage backwards through a table to the floor. This left John Cronus alone, and New Jack pinned him after coming off the top rope with a chair on him. The double dog collar match had Sandman and Pitbull number 2 over Raven and Douglas when PB pinned Raven after taking Raven's loaded boot off and hitting him with it, which sets up Raven title defenses upcoming against PB2, including the September 14th ECW arena show. Douglas walked out on Raven at the finish. Tons of blood in this match as well. Taz vs. Tommy Dreamer ended up with no finish as Taz got the choke on, but Beulah ran in, as did Terry Gordy. The Eliminators hit Gordy with total elimination and Brian Lee put the Asiatic spike on Gordy. Eliminators also destroyed several other underneath guys like Hack Myers, etc. who came in for the save. This was done to set up Eliminators and Lee vs. Dreamer and Gordy and Steve Williams on September 14th. The other major angle saw Doug Furnas debut, but he lost to Rob Van Dam in what was said to have been a very good match. Furnas got over big with the crowd. After the match, Furnas clotheslined Van Dam and challenged him to a tag match with Dan Crawford as his partner, and Van Dam agreed and picked Sabu to be his partner on September 14th. In other bouts, Gordy beat Lee in a bad street match, Lori Fullington beat Lady Alexander, Bubba Ray Dudley and Big Dick Dudley beat Devon Dudley and Axel Rotten, now with black hair and braids, doing a gay gimmick very similar to area indie wrestler Twiggy Ramirez, in a match where Bubba did some crazy flying moves for a guy his size and where Rotten was said to have done a great job carrying Big Dick. Mikey Whipwreck beat Little Guido to keep the European Junior title and Louis Spicolli pinned Devon Storm. The August 22nd show in Reading, Pennsylvania was said to have been the worst ECW show in months, drawing about 500 fans. It was billed as Requiem for a Pitbull due to the injury suffered by PB1, however there was nothing special on the show in that regard. PB2 no-showed the main event against Van Dam, which they said was because somebody slashed his tires in Philadelphia. Heyman said that he was actually picked up with an outstanding warrant and arrested on the spot at home, and that in reading, nobody had heard from him nor knew where he was or if he would eventually get there, and that he actually only made it to the ECW arena the next night after being released a few minutes before his scheduled dog collar match. Dreamer, who banged up his ribs badly, subbed, losing to Van Dam. Dreamer still worked the next night. Raven did have surgery on his foot and took it easy on the last few shows until August 23rd, where he had to work hurt. There were only 4 shows booked for September: September 13th in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, September 14th at the Arena, September 20th in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania, and September 27th in Allentown. Douglas and Francine have great heel chemistry. The deal with the Japanese women is that All Japan Women is putting together a vacation package where Manami Toyota, Toshio Yamada, Etsuko Mita and Mima Shimoda will go with fans on a December vacation to New York. They did something like this on a beach vacation last year with Takako Inoue and others, and they like to have them do one wrestling show as part of the package, so they were looking for an area indie to do their tag match, and the December 13th ECW date at the arena fit into the schedule, so it's not like it's any political deal of working against WWF or WCW, who they were working with last year, although WCW now appears to be working with GIA and JWP as opposed to AJW, and WWF appears to have no interest in women's wrestling. They did an angle on television building to the Gangstas Eliminators where New Jack claimed he had a niece who was killed in the projects and blamed himself on not winning the tag titles sooner so they could have enough money to get her out of there. And said they won the tag titles because they needed the money because the family didn't have enough money to pay for the headstone. They interspersed the interview throughout the show and finished the show with the Eliminators attacking New Jack and leaving him laying, saying they didn't care or something to that effect. So now they're working deaths of family members to get sympathy for the babyfaces. September 9, 1996. No house shows for 2 more weeks. The situation involving Semu was that he had his throat slashed in a restaurant brawl and needed 50 stitches. This is the end of this conversion. Be sure to comment and subscribe. See you next time.